Up next, we are going to have a final presentation today in this track on empowering cancer patients during their diagnosis experience. And we have awesome speakers, Adrienne Moore of the Endometrial Cancer Action Network for African Americans, Betsy Ramaccia of Greater Good Studio, and Katherine Crawford-Gray of dandelionRX. They are going to guide us in understanding diagnosis experiences. So welcome, ladies.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me? Just quick sound check.
We can hear you. And we are missing
Adrienne.
Adrienne, yep.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Betsy, do you want to text her while I'm just doing the intro? Okay.
All right.
All right.
Away,
So
ladies.
thanks, Amy, for the introduction. And I just want to say congratulations on the event so far. My name is Katherine Crawford-Gray. I'm from dandelionRX, and our ambition is to help healthcare teams to communicate better with their cancer patients. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Adrienne, who will be joining us shortly, who was a participant in our research and design process, and Betsy from Greater Good Studio. And Greater Good Studio conducted the research for the project and designed for us some elegant solutions to the problem that we're trying to solve. And both of them are more expert than I am, and I'll hand over to them in a couple of minutes. But Betsy, if we could go to the next slide, please. Just quickly, the problem that we're trying to solve with human-centered design is, despite all the research today in healthcare communication, including oncology, patients are still leaving their initial diagnosis conversation confused, fearful, and feeling unprepared for the path ahead. And Betsy, to the next slide, please. And we know that most oncologists feel that they need to give specific information to their patient about the status of her cancer and her current treatment options. And there's a real sense of urgency with the next steps. And they care about their patients and they want their patients to understand. However, after the oncologist says, we've found cancer or you've got cancer, the patient and their caregivers hear little else. They go into shock. And to the next slide, please, Betsy. And so when a patient is in shock, it's almost impossible for them in the initial visit to fully understand a diagnosis of the cancer that they have in terms of the type of cancer, the stage, the grade of cancer, and why certain procedures and treatments are being recommended over others. And even if patients are writing things down during the diagnostic visit, they can often later have no recollection of doing so or remembering writing any of the notes that they took. And we also know from research that when visuals are, we know from research that oncologists primarily use oral communication. And we know that even when a person isn't in a state of shock from a diagnosis of cancer, information retention from oral communication is between 10 to 20%. So put the shock of a cancer diagnosis onto that moment, and those percentages drop off dramatically. And we know that when visuals are used, and many people in this conference will be familiar with this, when they're used as part of the communication process, information retention is much higher. And yet what we're seeing in the oncology space is that communication tools tend to be handouts or pamphlets, which aren't designed with a clear understanding of the patient's mental or emotional state during a diagnosis appointment, or their level of health literacy, or the different cultural lenses that people bring to their experiences. And these materials, these visual materials, tend to give broad overviews of cancer types and treatments, and they don't allow the patient to see their own individual diagnosis and their pathway forward. And so while there are more increasingly human-centered design approaches to healthcare communications that really do focus on the patient in this context, they often fail to consider the needs and the goals of the healthcare team and the providers, and the contextual barriers that providers face, such as not enough time to spend with the patient. Next slide, please, Betsy. And so one of the pivotal moments during the research process for us was that for patients, a full and complete understanding of their cancer diagnosis and their treatment plan is not a reasonable goal for the first visit with their oncologist. And while this sounds so straightforward, this finding is, we couldn't find it in the research, and we found a lot of research about empowering and educating the patient, but really they're not ready for that at this first visit. So we wanted to really understand what would be a reasonable goal for patients at their diagnostic visit, and what sort of tools could we design to help the provider be a better communicator with the patient, and so that they can both achieve their goals. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to the experts, Adrienne and Betsy, and they're going to have a conversation about what the more reasonable goals would be for the diagnostic visit.
Thank you so much, Katherine. And everyone can hear me okay? Thumbs up. Awesome.
Can everyone hear me okay? Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Yes. Great.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Katherine. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Amy, for that introduction. I apologize. I had some technical difficulties, but I'm here now.
No, no worries. I feel like that is the past year of technical difficulties, and we all just persevere. Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Katherine, for that kind of tee up. And so if a full comprehension of a diagnosis is not a reasonable goal for the diagnosis visit, you know, the question that we were grappling with and trying to understand through our research was, what is? And what we learned through primary research, speaking with patients who had ovarian and endometrial cancer, which was kind of our focus, as well as their caregivers and healthcare providers, was that first, building a foundation of trust with a patient and a caregiver is a reasonable goal and foundational and fundamental. These are relationships, right? And in some cases, they're long-term relationships. And like any relationship, when trust isn't central and strong, communication flounders. The next goal was to support the patient in developing an initial understanding of their diagnosis and treatment. So full comprehension is not possible, but an initial understanding is possible. If we think of school as an analogy, what we saw was that many providers understandably feel a lot of pressure to explain a lot of information all at once. So it's kind of a cram before the exam approach, whereas what this really needs to kind of be more akin to is the first day of school, really just starting to orient. And then lastly, the final goal is empowering the patient to engage in their care, be that feeling able to ask questions, to seek out supportive care services that work for them, or to be able to participate in shared decision-making about their treatment. So how can we center the patient and the provider in the design process to develop tools that support them in achieving these three goals? We, as I said, through our primary research, we were able to kind of land upon these three goals. And then we continue to work alongside patients, their caregivers, and a range of healthcare providers to build and test out prototypes of varying fidelities. They were involved in kind of every step of the process and in multiple decisions around the experience, the content, the form, and the visual style of these tools. We're not actually going to talk in depth today because we have limited time about our process, but we wanted instead to highlight and elevate just a few of the many ways that firsthand experience and lived expertise really truly helped shape the design of these tools. We had the honor of learning and working alongside Adrienne throughout multiple points in this process. And Adrienne, I'd love today to kind of have a bit of a Q&A with you, as Katherine said, and to take each one of these goals, trust, learning, and empowerment, and learn a little bit more about how they were or weren't a part of your experience. And then we'll kind of talk through how those takeaways show up in our tools. You ready?
Great. Yeah,
Awesome.
I'm ready. I'm ready to go. Okay. Well, first, thank you everyone for having me here. And to give you some background, I was diagnosed with my first cancer in 2000. was an ovarian cancer, and I was treated successfully for it. But 13 years later, I was diagnosed with my second cancer, endometrial cancer. So initially, when I learned in 2016 that I had endometrial cancer, I felt a little failed by my previous healthcare providers, because somewhere in that 13-year gap was a missed opportunity to educate me about other GYN cancers that might be linked to an ovarian cancer. So going in to meet my oncologist for the first time, or even to do a follow-up with the GYN, I think I had a blanket mistrust, a little bit skeptical about how honest those persons were going to be with me, because I felt I was dismissed all those years. And then was the onus on me to establish some type of foundation for what our relationship was going to look like going forward. And I don't think I was equipped with the tools to do that.
Yeah, thank you for kind of laying that background and helping us just kind of understand this almost like negative balance of trust that understandably you were walking into your more recent diagnosis with. I guess I'm curious, from your perspective, looking back, how could your oncologist help to rebuild some of that trust with you?
Well, first, it would have been beneficial to have some transparency, like a blueprint of sorts, to show what my care plan was going to look like. That type of forethought would have spoken to me and said, I see you, I hear you, this is our plan, and we're a team and we'll walk through this together. Next, I want to know how accessible that physician was going to be to me, because when we're inside of the visit, there's only so much that we could talk about and only so many questions I could remember to ask. So I didn't want to feel like once the visit was over that my care was over. I wanted some type of an extension. If you're telling me we're a team, then let's have some continuity of care after that visit. And then lastly, I like for you to be relatable. Oftentimes in both of my cancer experiences, I didn't feel comfortable moving in and out of a dialogue with the oncologist because I thought that I might miss something, or I wasn't prepared to write it down and fast enough in order to look up the words. Because it's such an overwhelming conversation, I think there's a need for it to be a slow conversation, to allow for patients to absorb what's being said and given time to process it in their own terms.
Thank you for sharing all of that that wisdom with us, Adrienne. Just to kind of pull back the curtain here and show, I'm just going to jump ahead to some of these. We've been talking about these tools. What are these tools? So as I said, Adrienne shared a lot of that with us, along with others who helped shape these tools. Here's kind of an overview of what the tools include, just to kind of orient the audience. There are a series of worksheets on the right-hand side that a provider would use during a diagnosis appointment. On the far left, there's a journal for patients to track their care and their experience. The teal journal is for a caregiver that provides advice and a place for them to track their own questions and thoughts that they're having as well. And then all of that is contained in a folder that the patient can take with them and go home with. To your point around like transparency and wanting to feel like my doctor sees me, Adrienne, I think one thing that we tried to incorporate into these tools was like an extreme amount of customization, knowing that we actually couldn't customize, right? These tools have to work for any endometrial or ovarian cancer patient. And so we sort of tried to cut out all of the fat of the extra information that's sometimes the generic information that's given around about these diagnoses, and actually just focus on or allow rather the provider to be able to mark very clearly what is specific to you. That way they're sort of also acknowledging that they see you and that this is about you right now, right?
Right, exactly.
Another thing that we tried to do was make sure that, this is the whole care team is sort of elevated and illuminated at the outset. You know, obviously care team professionals will come in that maybe you didn't know about at the very beginning. But that this is the beginning of a longer term experience, and that there's a lot of people around you who are accessible, to your point. This in the journal, you can see that it's a trifold folder, and that there's one page when the provider or the patient can write down or include the business cards of the people who are on their care team. And then lastly, here in this image, you can see a doctor holding up one of these worksheets. The bottom is sort of highlighted here. There's a box for asking that asks, what questions do you have? And we, to your point about being relatable, Adrienne, we wanted to make sure that we could sort of prompt the provider to pause and ask if the patient has any questions or the caregiver has any questions, so that there's more space for the patient to kind of take up and to participate in. So with that, I know we're short on time, so I'm just gonna keep moving here. So the next goal that we had was around learning and supporting the patient to develop an initial understanding of their diagnosis and treatment. Adrienne, I'm curious, you know, when you were in those conversations, how did your gynecologist and oncologist explain your diagnosis and treatment to you?
Well, most of the explanation was oral. I didn't feel like I had a lot of tangible tools that I could actually relate to. And because of that, I believe that I missed a lot. There were words that we're talking about trying to spell. You're also trying to, trying to recognize terminology. And oftentimes you're not able to circle back to through the conversation again. So if there was something that you missed during the dialogue, where there was no references anywhere that I could actually point to. So that was a really hard part of the communication, because it was entirely oral. We're committing so much unfamiliar terminology to memory, and sometimes you just become so intimidated that you stop trying to keep up. You shouldn't have to have a PhD to understand your diagnosis.
Certainly not. Yeah, that's really well put. You've had a chance to look over our tools, Adrienne. I'm curious, you know, when it comes to helping patients learn, what was your first impression of these tools?
Well, this is my favorite part. First, I noticed that the language, I loved it. It's simple. This page, which explains the person's type and grade, uses language that someone like myself without a medical degree can understand. Also, this kind of approach where the doctor checks the boxes to denote my type and my grade and so forth, makes it about me. So that's great. And then my other impression is how visual it is. I learn visually, and many people do. And when I have something that is visually friendly to the eye and it's not intimidating, it calms me down. And we need that in a cancer diagnosis. We need to feel like we're letting our guard down so we can start to open up our ears. So instead of being guarded, I want to engage and understand what this information means. It's not just harsh words on paper in black and white. It's a soft image that makes me want to lean in and listen.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that did echo things that we heard, sort of other sentiments from other people who have been patients, just about not only were these illustrations, this kind of visual metaphor clarifying, but it was also calming. And just to back up to make sure that the audience understands what they're looking at, we used a visual metaphor of a dandelion as a cancer cell throughout our tools to help explain some of the more technical aspects of a diagnosis. So here you can see how the dandelion is being treated in various ways to convey different kinds of treatment plans. Also use the dandelion to convey stage. So you could see that, you know, this is a dandelion that has gone to seed, and we're able to kind of show how stage is about how the cancer is spreading within and beyond the initial site through an image like this. Okay, and those were two pictures of worksheets that are a part of this tool. The last goal is about empowering the patient to engage in their care. And we know that, we heard from our research that, many people in this moment very understandably feel powerless, right? This is a huge disruption. It feels really unfair. A lot of people take a diagnosis in different ways, but many want to know everything that they can do rather to improve their experience and improve their situation. So Adrienne, I'm curious, I would love to hear from you, after you were diagnosed, what did you do to feel more control of your situation?
Well, what I did was I wrote down how I felt both physically and emotionally, noting specifically when it was happening, whether it was around treatment or follow-up visits with the oncologist. I wanted to see if there was something that happened with any specific regularity. It was simply for my own peace of mind, but tracking those things helped me to know what to expect. And over time, those things made everything that was so big feel manageable. I was able to cut it down into smaller pieces, and that made me feel more in control.
Yeah, that is truly impressive. So, as you know, Adrienne, we developed as a part of our tool a journal for patients. Within it, there's all kinds of additional information that they can read on their own time about their side effects, about sexual health, about nutritional support. And then there's also a lot of pages that look like this, that kind of has the calendar down the side and allows you to track tests, treatments, supportive care, other activities, and how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis. What would something like this have helped you to do had you had it?
No, had I had it. Well, this would certainly help me to see patterns between what was happening and how I was feeling. During treatment, there was so much that I couldn't predict, but the little bit of consistency helped me to build a lot more confidence between treatment cycles. I was able to see a relationship between after treatment and my physical, emotional, or mental state, which made me better prepared for what I needed to do. As a cancer patient, there's so much we have to fight for. So that was empowering. Just being able to notice what was going on with my body and being in sync with if it was in relation to my treatment or after treatment. So as a survivor and an advocate, I feel empowered when I can say with assurance that this technique helped me, and I'm sure it will help you as well.
Yeah, that's truly amazing. Thank you for sharing all of your experiences today. I know that we're short on time. I know we're a little bit over. I just want to say Adrienne was one of many people who are kind of the real authors of this work, that we couldn't have done any of this without. We engaged them, as I said, kind of like through multiple rounds of learning and prototyping. And so just want to kind of thank them all. And also just want to thank everyone who's still sticking around on this track. I know that we're a couple minutes over, so thank you for sticking around to the end. It's been a real joy to kind of learn from everyone else today.
Thank you so much, ladies. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Adrienne, for paying it forward to cancer patients that are going to come after you and benefit from everything that you contributed to this experience, as well as you, Katherine and Betsy. The work is phenomenal. So thank you, everyone. And we will see you main stage in 3 minutes.